This is Beyond the Resume, the podcast that brings you the stories, advice, and insights behind some of the most successful people in real estate. Beyond the Resume is brought to you by Jackson Lucas Executive Search, the industry leader in human capital solutions. Here is Chris Papa and Lisa Flicker.
David Genovese. Or do you say Genovese?
You know, I grew up in Fairfield County, Connecticut, so we just anglicized it to Genovese. We de-Italianed it a little bit, but we're going to go back.
David Genovese. David Genovese, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
So David, you are the CEO. I'm sorry, Lisa. You are the CEO of Baywater Properties in Connecticut. Can you tell us about Baywater?
Yeah, sure thing. Baywater is a locally focused investment and development company that I started in 2001. Candidly, I had been in investment banking. I worked at a great firm called Bankers Trust, which is where I think I first met Lisa.
Back in the 70s.
Yeah, I'm not that old. I'm getting old. I'm not that old. From about 1989 until 2000, I was there for about 10 years in the real estate investment banking group, basically focusing on a whole host of different kinds of transactions with clients around the country. And then around the world, I moved to Prague, Czechoslovakia when Eastern Europe kind of opened up, and spent about a year there. And then I went to London to help start a new investment banking group for Bankers Trust in London to cover Western and Eastern Europe, Central Europe. I was there, and then I came back in 1993 and was there in the early phases of like the second generation of REITs, did a lot of asset sale work, some principal investing. And then when Deutsche Bank bought Bankers Trust, I left after a few months and went to Credit Suisse to start a new investment banking group. But in November of 2001, after September 11th, I had an epiphany. I had just gotten married and my wife was pregnant with our first child. And having been through like 3 or 4 mergers, I kind of got sick of it. And while I loved investment banking and I loved the companies that I'd worked for, especially Bankers Trust and the team I was a part of, I just had this vision of starting my own real estate investment company. And in November of 2001, I got up the courage to do it. And I left, to basically focus on investments in Fairfield and Westchester County, value add type investments. I was originally trying to be the operating partner for a large private equity firm called TA Associates. I was very close to them from some work I'd done with one of the partners there, Jim Whalen, over the years. And I'd become a good friend and a client. And they never had a partner in this region. So we were looking at different opportunities. And unfortunately, what we quickly discovered was that there really weren't enough opportunities of a scale for them and the kinds of investments that they wanted to make. And so I started making smaller investments with my own capital, and then with like a small pool of friends and family. I bought an industrial park in Norwalk, Connecticut. Then Dick Gunthal, who was the head of our real estate group at Bankers Trust for a long time, and my mentor, called me because he'd invested in a surgical center business that wanted to open a surgery center in Wilton, Connecticut. And he didn't want to lease the property. He wanted to own the building based upon, the magnitude of the investment he was going to have to make, or the company was going to have to make in the surgical center. And so he called me and he said, "Hey, David, I have this great idea. Why don't you and I build a building?" And so we found a piece of land in Wilton, bought it. I worked on the zoning, the design, got the entitlements. He and I, teamed up as equity partners and basically built the building. He had left Deutsche Bank and was, kind of in between gigs that he had enjoyed. And so we built this building, and I did what I swore I would never do, is I became a developer. I literally, when I started this business, I said, I'm going to buy distressed buildings and fix them and try to own them for a long period of time. Development is just too risky. There's too many things that can go wrong. It can take forever, and you miss a cycle and deliver in the wrong moment. And lo and behold, there I was in 2002 and 2003 building buildings with Dick. But it worked. And we found that we could create more value, through the development process. And so, I bought a few other smaller buildings in the area in Fairfield County. Dick actually went on to found with Paul Turovsky a private equity firm called True North. They then became my financial partner in a number of distressed office investments, throughout Fairfield and Westchester County. But while that was going on, I ended up finding my way into a couple of other development projects, kind of the most visible of which was in Darien, Connecticut. In 2007 and 8, we built a mixed-use building called 1020 Boston Post Road, which had, first floor of retail, restaurants, a day spa, second floor office, and the third floor apartments. And it worked. We delivered it, in the fall of 08 into the darkest hours of the real estate market. But, we bought the land well and built it well and leased it during construction. And so, it actually proved to be a really good investment in a really transformational project for the downtown of Darien, which was in the early stages of trying to figure out how to just become a more interesting, more walkable, and more commerce-friendly downtown. Darien had, historically been a very, very sleepy kind of bedroom community of New York, and the zoning regulations were extremely restrictive. And they, for a reason, they didn't really want in the 40s and 50s, a vibrant downtown. I think the attitude was
keep the riffraff out.
Well, most people worked in New York, and they were like, we work in the city all day, and we come home on the weekends, and if we want action, we'll travel to New Canaan or Greenwich or Westport, Stamford or Norwalk. And so they just kind of left it the way it was. And so when you look at the demographics of the town and you look at where it sits in the middle of Fairfield County, it never really made any sense, how sort of tired and kind of dilapidated it was. And people laugh when I say that because they're like, Darien, Connecticut, like, how could it be dilapidated and ratty? But if you know the place, and if you were here in the 70s or 80s or 90s, it really truly was.
This is a question that we get all the time, and I feel like you'll have an educated answer to it, which is students or folks starting out in their career, should they go into investment banking versus going directly into development? And I'm not asking you your opinion on work-life balance or anything like that, but I'm just curious, having kind of been through it and had a lot of peers who I'm sure have been through it. What's your advice to people who may or may not want to go into investment banking?
I wouldn't trade anything for the experience that I had in investment banking. I think that it gave me the foundation to in the skill set to be able to do what I do now. I don't think I would have been able to do what I did were it not for the experience that I had. It really gave me the foundation. And I think the key is, like, and I always say this to people, if you work for a small development company, especially a smaller development company, I mean, someone who would have come to work with me over the last 10 years would have maybe worked on one transaction a year. I feel like, the investment banking experience that I had, the reps, we always talk about like reps and just doing so many models, seeing so many different projects and transactions and interacting with so many different people. That gave me the foundation and the perspective to do what I do now. I always say to, like, even the bankers that I work with, in the commercial banking relationships that we have, like, having been in finance for 12 years and having seen so many things, like, it makes me, makes me a better borrower. It makes me a better communicator of what I'm trying to do, and help me, like, study the risk. A funny thing though, when I was in college, when I first got out of college, or I was graduating, I wanted to go into development, and I was given an offer from the predecessor company to ESRT, Empire State Realty, and they wanted me to come join them to work on what was called Metro Center 2. It was the second phase of Metro Center at the Stanford train station. And they said, this offer is contingent on that project starting. This was 1989. That project still hasn't started. Thankfully, I didn't sit around and wait for the job. But when the nice guy who offered me the position, called me to tell me that, I was going to have to wait a while, he said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, maybe I'll go into banking and finance, because the world was pretty weird in 1989. And he said to me, oh God, whatever you do, and he was a real developer. He's like, don't go into banking. You'll only focus on the downside. You'll never be able to be a developer. You'll never have the courage to pull the trigger because you'll only think about what could go wrong. And look, I understand his vantage point, and I laugh about it now, but I think, being able to kind of assess risk from a different lens, using a different lens, but then, maintaining a sense of optimism and looking at the upside associated with these things, really made me a better investor, a better developer. And so, for the most part, the things we've done have worked out fairly well. And it's been a really extraordinary journey.
David, you mentioned risk. I mean, I think banking is, I wouldn't say it's not risky, right? You work a lot. You know you're going to generally make pretty good money, like overall. But development, I come from a family of developers, and it is like, I mean, I've seen the booms, I've seen the busts. I mean, it's a lot of risk, and then could be a big boom, or a lot of risk, and it could be nothing, right? And so it's you have to have a high risk tolerance to get in there. Like, what? It seems kind of really scary.
It is scary.
How did you get over that? Or like, did you just not know enough to be scared?
I don't know. No. I mean, quite the contrary. Like I say, especially now with this new project we're working on, I mean, to be totally candid, like, I live in fear every day. It's not, I don't love that part of the job. I don't love it, but, and especially in the moment right now, because the thing we're working on, the Corbin District project that we're working on right now, is larger than anything we've done before. So it's a bigger project. We started actually building it during COVID, during the pandemic. Phase one, we started in, 22, 23. So, I mean, these were some kind of scary times. And, over the 23 years I've been doing this, that's Baywater Properties, I've kind of been through three pretty scary moments, two, especially two, really, '08 and then COVID. And, I mean, in the beginning, I would say there were these moments where I really missed a paycheck, and, my bonus, I would always joke that, like, in, February, it was like I would just be like that anticipation of, like, your bonus hitting your bank account, and, like, it didn't happen. And not only did it not happen, but there was just, like, continuous outflow to feed my family, and then, to kind of build the business. But slowly and steadily, we've built a business of, owned assets, acquired and developed and owned assets that have enabled us to build a company that I'm really proud of. And, I love the distressed deals that we've bought and the things that we've turned around. I love the challenges associated with those. But I also have really enjoyed this opportunity I've had. And it's really, an honor in a way. And I don't mean to sound corny, but, I grew up in Darien. So it's really been kind of a privilege to be able to work on this transformational project that, has profound impact on my hometown, where I grew up, and actually where I'm now raising my family. So there've been so many levels to it, and it goes beyond, just the financial aspects of what we do and the financial reward. As part of Corbin, we also we had to build affordable housing. Darien has a 12% inclusionary zoning requirement. Now it's 14. They raised it to 14. And there were 2 or 3 other projects going on at the same time. And, the big projects, Federal Realty completed recently a project in Norotan Heights in Darien. And John Vaccaro, who I worked with for a moment at Deutsche Bank, he's doing a development project, a near Federal's project in that same neighborhood. And then we've got the downtown project. They're all complying with the inclusionary zoning requirement. I happen to have a number of friends who have children with developmental or intellectual disabilities. And I'm sort of witnessing firsthand, how hard it is for them to find housing for their children as their children age and become adults. And it occurred to me that they would qualify for affordable housing. So I went to the town and I said, I have this idea. I have a lot of friends whose sons and daughters need this kind of housing. What if I built my housing for that population that is sort of underserved? And the town loved it. So we built 12 units of supportive housing offsite for people who need a little more support and supervision and guidance. And then we're doing 2 units on site for the same population, but that is a little higher functioning and maybe needs a little less support. And so, again, it's just not just about the economics of what we're doing. It's like sort of, finding myself now in this position where I get to do some really interesting things that help people has been really cool and totally unexpected. It was not like 20 years ago when I started thinking about this, I was not thinking, oh, I'm going to like fix my downtown and where I grew up and then get to help
Yeah.
my children. That was never in my plan, but we kind of iterated into these unique and interesting opportunities because of our skill set and kind of position in the market. And I think maybe just interest in trying to do some good while we do our business. Scott Reckler often talks about, having positive impact on the community and like doing good while you do well. I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big fan of Scott's, and I really take that to heart and try to infuse my work with good work. Good work for the community as I blaze the path here.
I love that. So when you have the housing that you're talking about, do you have services that go with that?
Yeah. So actually what we did, we partnered with a nonprofit from Greenwich, Connecticut called Ableist, whom I met through a friend. And, because I'm not capable of providing those services. My firm is not capable of providing those services. And so we partnered with...
Was that at Bankers Trust?
They did not teach me that at Bankers Trust. So we partnered with Ableist. They provide all the services. And actually, to be candid, and, I can talk about this as much as you like, but we built the units with them as a partnership. I mean, we put up all the capital. And then on completion, we actually donated it to Ableist. So we gifted it to them. And, the idea was it was deed restricted for 40 years. When you build affordable housing, especially in a community like this, given construction costs, the value of the asset is less than, you paid for it, you spent to build it on completion because of the deed restrictions and the rent limits. So, it was a part of a bigger transaction. So we looked at it and said, if we built it and it's standing here, really, what's the value over 40 years to us? If we give it to Ableist, there's some amount of our equity can be considered a donation to them. Some of it was sort of, lost value through the income limit, the rent limit, but we donated it to them and they own it forever. And they're not subject to the risk that like one day, I changed my mind and I don't want to do that anymore. I mean, they're in control and, 11 people live there in the 12 units. One of the units is reserved for a staff member and it changed a lot of lives. So it's really cool work. Yeah.
But you mentioned your downtown and like, yeah, it'd be awesome if I'm just picturing going back to my hometown, doing what you did. That'd be pretty extraordinary. We've heard that you have studied Main Streets. Is that correct? Are you a studier of different Main Streets? So what makes a good downtown? What are your favorites downtowns? And what makes a good downtown?
That's a sad question today. It's a very, very sad question to ask today because, what I did in setting out to do this. Well, I'll back up for a sec. When I first started focusing on Darien, it was not honestly like as an investor. I had only my house in Darien. I had commercial properties in Norwalk and at the time Wilton with Dick. But our mayor at the time, this was going back to like 2002 or 3, decided to try to, start a dialogue with the community around improving the downtown. And she enlisted a group of volunteers to be a part of a committee that would engage with the Connecticut Main Street Center, which is an offshoot of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And they're like a management consultant of sorts that, descends on a town and they give the town objective advice about how to like basically improve their downtown. And for the most part, they're working in downtowns that have really fallen into a sad state. So in Connecticut, for example, they worked with the city of Waterbury or, the city of Torrington, like some towns that are kind of, they had better days. And, a lot of industry had left, commerce had left, and there's a lot of empty storefronts and so on. The Main Street Center people kind of laughed when Darien called. They're like, wait, we didn't expect this call. Darien needs our help. But they really did, because when you try to convince a zoning board to change its regulations to enable good development to occur, you've got volunteers, well-meaning volunteers on the zoning board who generally are not real estate experts, and they're sitting there trying to do the right thing. But the people on the other side of the dais are like, people like me or more sophisticated people, armed with lawyers and architects and engineers, all telling them, don't worry, like this is going to be great. We promise, and they don't really know what the truth is. or they don't really know what the appropriate limits are. And so Connecticut Main Street really gave the town objective advice on how to like tweak the zoning regulations around the edges and, set up a situation where, good quality development could occur. And then the town, the zoning commissioners and the volunteers in the town, really passionate, some more, I would say with my bias, some more constructive than others, really engaged and tried to support good ideas. But in that journey that I've been on, I really went deep on trying to figure out what made a better Main Street. And so I did all this research. I met these planners from a firm that works internationally called Dwani Plater Zyberg. They're a well-regarded urban planning firm, probably one of the best regarded urban planning firms in the world, based in Miami. They led me to a gentleman by the name of Bob Gibbs, who used to work for Taubman. He was a mall guy who realized about 10 years into his career that he didn't like malls and he really preferred street retail. And so he became kind of I would say one of the national experts on how to make great main streets. He's written several books. He teaches a class at Harvard every summer in the School of Architecture, which I've taken. Bob and I became very close. He worked on, for example, if you've ever been to Naples, Florida, he helped Naples kind of create that whole 3rd Street South area, Fifth Avenue in Naples. And he'd often ride shotgun with DPZ on like their projects, like Celebration in Florida and Rosemary Beach and places like that. So anyway, great guy, deep thinker, taught me a lot about, continuous sidewalks and engaging storefronts and, the value of street furniture and street trees and, just making places like really inviting and entertaining to walk down. Because, what happens is, especially in a place like Darien, people generally, many of us, not all of us, but many of us lived and worked in New York and in New York City, right? With the storefronts of Madison Avenue or down in, the Meatpacking District, you'd walk for an hour and not think twice about it. But if we all move out to the suburbs and it's like people get in their car and they're like, wait, what are you talking about? I have to like walk 200 yards from the parking lot to the store I want to go to, and so the trick is to make that walk pleasant, safe, and visually engaging. And so a lot of the work that we've done, has been to kind of bring that to Darien. If like out here, if New Canaan or, New Canaan's Elm Street or Greenwich Avenue, those are great retail streets. They're very walkable. They're entertaining. They're fun. There's great storefronts. But, you get one block that gets, blighted or, where the storefronts aren't great or the store selection isn't great. The mall people are experts in this. They know exactly what works best next to what and what will make people kind of walk further and go further and pass by stores and importantly, spend money. Downtowns are different because so often they're owned by so many different people who only care about like one property. Right? If you think about a downtown versus a mall, Simon owns a mall. Mace Rich, Jackson Shea, who worked with me at Banker Trust now, CEO of Mace Rich, like they own a mall. Their goal is to make the value of that mall as high as possible. And they've got all these different levers they can pull and things they can do to like maximize the customer experience, the shopper experience, and make that mall worth more, make those stores perform better. So if the sales are higher, the rents can be higher. But a downtown is usually owned by like 1,000 people, 1 million people, however, 100 people, 10 people. And they're not usually looking at it holistically. So the cool thing about what we ended up, doing in Darien was we my partners and I acquired a lot of the downtown in Darien, a good chunk of it. And so, we're able to have really kind of profound impact on the retail mix, the streetscape, the walkability and the architecture of it. So anyway, that's a long way of getting back to the way this question started. You asked me, what places did I study? I said it was a sad week. One of the places I went very deep on was Palisades Village, which was built by Rick Caruso in Pacific Palisades. I've walked, every inch of that place probably 3 or 4 times over the years and took a lot of cues from what Rick Caruso did. I mean, he is a brilliant real estate developer, an incredible leader. And it just so saddens me to see what happened out there. And, he was able to protect Palisades Village, but, the neighborhoods around, as are just decimated. It's just so sad. But Palisades Village is an example of a great place. Brentwood Country Mart is a smaller, cooler, kind of hipper, shopping area in Brentwood, controlled by this guy, Jim Rosenberg, that has been really inspirational for me. Federal Realty's done some great projects like Santana Row in San Jose, Bethesda Row. These are some great places. But what I'm trying to do in Darien is, as I often say to people, something in between Pacific Palisades, Palisades Village, and Brentwood Country Mart. Because one criticism I would say, I shouldn't criticize my peers, but I will say a lot of these places start to look the same. And a lot of these places, if you really look closely, you'll see like the rent rolls are kind of all the same. Every one of them's got a sweet green, a cava, a blow dry bar, a gloss lab, a F45. They're all kind of, they're a lot the same. And it's a kind of a confluence of things. It's like developers are trying to pick successful concepts, and then private equity's backing these retail brands and just blowing them out. There's a Maman on every corner, and in Boston or DC, there's a Tate on every corner. They're great businesses, but like suddenly, these communities kind of all start to look the same, and I don't want to do that. So
yeah, I live in San Carlos, California, which is kind of just north of Palo Alto and south of Burlingame, if you know. And so my friend was mentioning yesterday, like Burlingame is a couple towns north, and it's become all brands. It becomes it's like every other place you just mentioned, right? It has all the same stores.
Yeah.
So San Carlos is
weird.
not there yet, and I'm hoping doesn't get there. It still has like a lot of local shops. I mean, it's beautiful. It's great. It's very family friendly, and walk downtown.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is that these local stores, they fear, and this has been a big part of my thing. Like, they all fear, like in Darien, everyone say, oh, the developer, you're going to buy all this property, you're going to jack the rents, and we're not going to be able to afford to be here. And, my premise to them, my response to that is, if I build a great place and your sales go up by 50% because there's more people walking the streets and spending money in this place, if your sales go up, the rent can go up and we can both be winners. If I artificially, by edict say I'm raising the rents to, Greenwich Avenue levels, and like it's now going to be $140 a foot or $200 a foot, but the pedestrians aren't there and the sales aren't there, you're going to lose and I'm going to lose. So I really spend a lot of time trying to, convince local, store owners to kind of believe in what we're doing. And really thus far, it's working. I mean, we've been gentle on them. We haven't raised the rents much above where they were when we took their old buildings down, put them in the new buildings, but they all report pretty significant sales increases already. And we have not even finished the second phase of the project. So I believe strongly that when the second phase is done of this project we're working on, if we get this right, which I think we will, there will be bigger sales, greater sales, and over time we'll both win. But you can't. That's the problem, right? Like someone looks at your downtown and says, "Oh, this could be so much better if I fill it with the usual suspects. I can jack the rent and throw everybody out, and then the local people get scared, the local operators get scared and quit." You got to bridge the gap. But we have, and that puts the burden on us. We have to make it happen and get the people there to support the businesses. And I always say, like, we're a long-term holder of these projects. So, for 5 years, we'll keep the rents low. And then when the rent resets to fair market value, we'll have a conversation of where your sales are. By the way, it's a two-way street too. If your business isn't performing because it's not a good business anymore, which has happened, it's not my fault if the photo developer, closes. With everybody using digital photography now, or if, I don't know, pick another thing that just kind of went the way of the dodo bird. I don't
know. The horse and buggy shop.
Yeah, horse and buggy shop.
Develop, is super important. It's very local, right? Again, you're very local, and you probably, when I worked for my uncle in Richmond, Virginia, he was a local developer there. He would go to the coffee shop in the morning just to know everybody, what's going on. It's and so networking is super important, especially development. I heard you have I heard you had a really great chili. Do you make good chili? And then two, you had an important networking event at a local event, right? So you got to be involved with the community. So I think it's a good lesson of how you can be involved with the community and meet people, and it leads to
How did you hear about the chili party?
Chris knows
I'm on a chili Reddit boards. I go deep into the chili Reddit.
That's pretty funny.
Wait, was there chili at the community event?
No.
No,
That's
no,
literally
okay.
how I met the mayor at the time, who basically my neighborhood, I just moved to town. My neighborhood had this chili contest. My wife and I entered. We did not come near winning, not even close. But I met the mayor at the time, and she said, that's when she gave me the pitch. She's like, I heard you're into real estate. I heard you're a decent guy. Like, and I'm trying to put this committee together to, start a conversation about improving the downtown. Would you be a part of it? And that's literally how the dialogue started. In 2002, I think it was.
It's all
That's
local.
pretty funny. That's some deep research, Chris. I'm impressed.
Well, it's all Julio. Julio is, I know he just looks like a pretty face, but he loves chili. He
Yeah.
loves chili.
No, but the thing is, I would say, I have to figure out, I'm 57 years old, so I have to figure out what I do next and where we go from here. I've loved, the work that I've gotten to do over the last 20 years. I'm really proud of it. I've put together, I think, a great team, and I really enjoy this. And I love this business, so many aspects of it. It is scary, and you live in a little bit of fear all the time, but I love it. But I don't think that in the way that I've done this to date, I don't think I would have ever taken the risk I took in a market I didn't know as well as these markets, right? Because I do walk these streets every day, and I do know the community innately because I've lived here for so long. I grew up here, I left, I came back. And I joke that, like, I'm kind of a walking focus group. It causes a little chaos in my life from time to time. Like, my wife will say, and maybe your dad had the same, or your uncle had the same experience. Like, if I go to the grocery store to pick up a gallon of milk on Saturday because we're out, I might not come home for an hour because, Mrs. Johnson's going to grab me and ask me about, what new businesses are coming to the new project, and when am I going to be done, and when will the traffic associated with the construction slow, and how it goes. So, but I don't think I would take this kind of risk in a place I didn't know as well. We'll see. We'll see what happens next. I may just do simpler things going forward. Mixed use is the most complicated kind of development. The infrastructure requirements, the complexities associated with, like, interweaving residential, retail, commercial. The Corbin District project, it's got about 100,000 feet of retail or first floor space, retail, fitness, restaurants. It's got 110,000 feet or so of office and 116 apartments, excluding the 12 we built for ableists. So, there's just a lot going on.
Yeah. Well, David, if you think
Yeah.
if you think Mrs. Johnson was good at grilling you, wait till you enter the hot seat.
Oh! Are they on it? I'm not on it yet?
You're on it right now.
Oh,
Where
That's
is
it.
Where
Mrs.
is it?
Johnson.
Tell the
Yeah.
temperature rising.
Yeah, there we
Mrs.
go.
Johnson's got nothing on us. Oh, he's taking some water. Good.
So we'll start
Hydrate.
you off easy. Do you have any books or podcasts that you'd recommend?
I love How I Built This by Guy Raz.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Absolutely love it. I love the fact that, like, when you listen to it over time and you listen to multiple ones, I feel like every entrepreneur's story kind of has common elements of, like, the initial epiphany, the idea, and then the beginning of execution, and, a little taste of success, and then the near-death experience that
Yeah.
extinguishes the whole thing, right?
It's the hero's journey. The hero's
Yeah.
journey.
Yeah, I love Guy Raz. I like. Well, I don't want to talk about Matt Slepin on a Jackson Lucas podcast. I like the real estate voices, but I think this is like this is the next. This is going to
Yeah,
be
this
this is
is
going to be the one that takes you.
Have you been on the Real Estate Voices?
No.
Have you been on this one? All right.
Yep. You asked about a book. This is a funny story, and I'm going to give him a shout out. This book, Building Optimism, by Kobe Lefkowitz, about, I would say, 6 months ago, the former chairman of our zoning commission in Darien forwarded to me a tweet that he'd seen by Kobe Lefkowitz with pictures of my project, the first phase, saying, this is like one of the greatest examples of mixed-use development I've seen in the country, the Corbin District, blah, blah, blah. And I never heard of him. I didn't know who he was. So I just simply wrote him a message and I said, Kobe, thank you so much for your kind words. I really appreciate that you like our work. And so so suddenly now he's in my network. I think I hit him on LinkedIn. He published that book in November. I bought it. I read it over Christmas. I devoured it. It's about, mixed use places and kind of the value uh, to communities of creating beautiful places that are not generic, walkable. It literally, I mean, he's kind of a new urbanist at heart, and and he's he studied architecture at UVA, but he's a developer, writer, designer. He's young, but he's very, very thoughtful. And I've loved the book. And actually, he came to visit, and I took him on a tour of the Corbin District this
Cool.
week. Yeah, so we actually met in person. But I that's my most recent book that I've loved. But I'd say How I Built This Among Podcasts.
Yeah. That we kind of modeled this podcast after that a little bit, like your kind of story, how you got into it. And do you have a signed book by Larry Silverstein on your desk, like Lisa does behind her?
I do not. I do
you go.
not. That's pretty
I
cool.
signed to Chris.
Signed to me.
I want to read that. I have not read his book yet. I need to get that book.
Come on over and borrow it anytime.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Jonathan Rose has a really good book about cities too, which is really good. I read that recently, or I've been reading it for like years. All right. Question number 2, what is your most memorable deal? You talked about the one with the ableist.
Most memorable deal. Well, in my whole career?
Yeah.
I've had some really interesting experiences. I mean, I worked in Prague, in the early days of the privatization of formerly Communist Party owned properties. I worked on the privatization of a hotel. That was pretty wild. I was on the team. I was on the deal team. I was like an analyst. I mean, this might be when I met Lisa. And literally at one point, the mayor of Prague, who was our client, called and said, and these were like dark days. We were all just trying to figure out how to stay alive. It was like 1992, 91, 92, really dark times in commercial real estate. And Bankers Trust had an economist who was Czech and was very dialed into like the intellectual elite who, when the wall fell, all became ministers of industry, minister of privatization, minister of tourism. They all became governmental officials leading like the transition back to a capitalist society. And so we're working on this deal, and I'm like the 23 years old, punk. And the mayor of Prague calls my boss, calls Dick Untitled, and says, through a translator, this isn't really working. My whole political career is at risk if this project doesn't work. I want boots on the ground. I don't want your bankers flying in on planes, like parachuting in for 3 days, staying in fancy hotels, eating out, and then leaving, and then coming back, the next month or the next week. Like, I need boots on the ground. So Dick Untitled calls us in and says, okay, the mayor is demanding that someone go live in Prague and work out of his office on this project. Who among you wants to do that? And of course, the senior people on the team were like, well, I have a wife and family. Like, I can't move to Prague. And I was like sharing an apartment with a friend. I raised my hand jokingly saying, well, I'll go. And they looked at me and they went, are you serious? I go, yeah, I'll do that. So, I got tagged and I ended up in Prague for like a year working on that project. And then that led to getting to work in London on some really interesting projects. I worked on the project with Scott Malkin, helping him build Value Retail. We made the first investment in Value Retail, building the Bicester Village in the UK. He went on to create an incredibly successful company and portfolio of, among the first value shopping centers in Europe. I got to work on. I sold the Hotel Bel Air in Bel Air, California. That was pretty wild. I worked on Rob McGuire's company, selling Rob McGuire's company. That might have been the most interesting deal. We were selling Rob McGuire's development and investment company in 2001. And Rob was just an amazing visionary and had built some of the most, iconic buildings in Los Angeles and in California. And we went to contract in August of 2001. One of the properties, some of the properties included the gas company tower, the library tower. Now it's called, I think, U.S. Bank Tower. And Rob controlled with Morgan Stanley, I think it was, Playa Vista, which included like the hangar, the airplane hangar where Howard Hughes built the Spruce Goose, which is now Google's LA headquarters. we went to contract with Trizicon, one of our clients, in August of '01, and then September 11th occurred. And and they Trizic, was in due diligence. They walked away because they didn't think they could insure the library tower, which was the tallest building west of the Mississippi. That was a really amazing situation to be a part of. And it ended up, Rob ended up going public and ended up creating, again, another great company, and then had some troubles later, when the financial crisis hit in '08. But those were some of the highlights in my banking career.
Those
in
are
Connecticut, yeah, those are highlights. That would be kind of recognizable to people.
Love that. You're up, Lise.
I'm up. So I'm sure you've done a tremendous amount of hiring in your time here. What do you look for when you hire somebody?
To be candid, I haven't in this next era of my life, this chapter of my life. I mean, my team is only 16 people, big. And we, when I started, it was just me. I pulled my father out of retirement who knew something about mechanical systems. I knew nothing about anything. And having a father who was like super handy, my wife jokes, I can barely change a light bulb. It's kind of pathetic. But I brought into the business, honestly, people who, I recently hired some really experienced construction people and development people. Kate Perez joined me from CIM. She's amazing, helping run the Corbin project. Doug Cravis joined me from a Papa John construction company we'd worked with a lot. He wanted to just transition away from being a pure construction manager. But like our property managers, for example, had no experience in real estate whatsoever. They were just smart, good people. One of my heroes in business is Danny Meyer. And, I just love him, and I love like kind of way he approaches his business and team, and how he built Union Square Hospitality. And, I read his book. If you haven't read it, Setting the Table is an amazing book about, being hospitable in business and kind of treating people well, both your team and your clients, and kind of the balancing act between, doing what's best for clients and doing what's demanded by clients, and doing what's reasonable for your team. But I've hired a lot of people who didn't really have experience in real estate, but were just smart, hardworking, and know how to get stuff done. And it's really been great. I mean, we're definitely, we've added over the years, but not the same. And it's about culture and stick to itiveness, and people who don't look at this as like a 9 to. The one problem with being in investment banking, I guess I would say, and then trying to go from investment banking to a business like this, or a side of the business like this, investment banking, I mean, we were like maniacal. Like we would, if someone said, walk across this bed of hot coals, until 3 a.m, I would do it. We were just so committed to whatever it was. And the rewards were great for performance. Finding people who will do whatever it takes to get the job done, without that same kind of economic reward, because, these positions, to be honest, don't reward economically in the same way as an investment banking job or a big private equity or other job like that. So it's hard to find people who just really care, but I've been really lucky in that I've been able to find people who really identify with and believe in the mission that I kind of laid out. And, they're passionate, and they're awesome.
It's a great answer. Yeah. So as you know, we don't do this stuff alone. Can you shout out to one or two of your mentors along the way?
Oh, sure. I got a few. Dick Gunthal, for sure, who ran the real estate group at Bankers Trust for a long time. He, built an incredible team of people, who you've probably interacted with over the years, and you should pull onto this podcast, like Kia Buckley, who is the CIO of Dune, Debbie Harmon, who's the co-founder of Artemis, David Brush, Lowell Barron's the CIO, or he might even be now the managing partner of Brookfield. I mean, the people who are in our group, what they've gone on to do was really just so amazing. And it was a magical place, largely due to Dick's leadership. There was a woman who worked with him also, Robin Sheeman, who he kind of called his human capital expert, who, really was sort of the glue that pulled us all together. There was also this awesome guy who worked with us. Sadly, he passed away, as did Dick. Dick passed away last year, but Howard Guja was this amazing guy who I worked with, who also really taught me about the importance of having fun while doing this work. And, Howard, so many of the people that I worked with at Bankers Trust were like, they went to like Harvard, Yale, Northwestern, Stanford, blah, 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 name the Ivy. Howard went to SUNY Farmingdale in Long Island, and he lived in Babylon, and he was a surfer, and he drove Dick crazy because if he would get up for work in the morning and before like the internet, if he found out that the waves were up at Gilgo Beach, he would like come to work late or not come to work. And Dick would just go batshit crazy on him. But, somehow Howard, was just the guy who every year, no matter how, he never knew how he was going to do it, but he would always just bring in this like monster transaction. And clients loved him because he was like the most street smart, down to earth guy who, like we always said, if you were in a trench in World War I and you needed to be with any one of us, who would you pick? Everybody picked Howard. And for me as a young banker, learning the trade and like, learning how to kind of conduct myself, I just remember there were so many moments where like, we'd be working like 100 hours a week, and Howard would grab me, pull me into his office excitedly and say, okay, I'm going to tell you something now. Like, you can't look like you slept on your desk last night. Like, now you're a managing director, or now you're a vice president. Like, you got to lead, and you got to look like you're able to lead, not like you slept on your desk. And he'd say, don't fly into the flame. You're flying into the flame. That was one of his great lines. I knew, over time, I just kind of knew what that meant. It was like, okay, time to just pull it back a little bit and like make this sustainable. And if it weren't for all the mergers, to be honest, I probably would have stayed in investment banking. I'm happy I didn't, but I really loved it. I learned so much from that cast of characters. It was an amazing journey.
I feel like somebody should write a book about that.
Serious?
Yeah. Yeah. That group was amazing. I mean, Lisa, you probably know all of them.
Yep. And they're all special people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the list is long.
Yeah. Well, David, that's the podcast. That was awesome. That was the best podcast.
Much.
It was
Thank
it was
you
worth
so
the wait.
much.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, listen, I'm so sorry, but doing what we do, it's like we've had a couple of crazy schedule constraints, and I'm really grateful for you, and I'm happy to help spread the word. I think you guys, this was fun to do. I enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Resume, a Jackson Lucas podcast, where we take a deep dive into the career journeys of some of the top minds in real estate and equip you with the knowledge to move forward in your path towards the success you've envisioned. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Beyond the Resume. We're grateful for your support. All episodes of Beyond the Resume are brought to you by Jackson Lucas, building inclusive and diverse businesses through talent acquisition. Visit us at jacksonlucas.com.